all the blame cannot be laid on the US and its policies. I would argue a fair share of the blame has to also lie outside. The US was the consumer of first and last resort because of its policies, but that suited countries outside very well, because many countries, including Japan, followed a policy of export-led growth, which proved enormously successful. And the policy went like this, and this was formulated initially by Japan, which was crushed by the post-World War II defeat. Tokyo was in rubble. They had to come out of it, but they have to come out of it recognizing that domestic demand was very weak. People were poor, people were shattered by the war. You could not rely on them to spend. So what route did Japan pick? It was, let us export to the world, rely on foreign demand, create strong companies which go out and export, and by exporting, they create growth domestically. So we are going to give incentives for these companies. We are going to repress the domestic economy. We're going to repress households. We're going to favor companies. But we're going to hope that as they export, they create domestic jobs and lift us out of trouble. This was a strategy which worked perfectly. It worked because it created extremely strong companies, the exporters that all of you have heard of. Toyota, Mitsubishi, Honda, Fujitsu. I mean, you can roll off Japanese manufacturing companies by the dozens. Let me ask you, can you name one Japanese consulting firm? And Ernst & Young, even though it has Japanese branches, is not a Japanese consulting firm. Hard. You may argue that's because the Japanese don't speak as much English. Well, let's talk about services that don't require English as much. Can you name one Japanese hotel chain that is wildly successful, like Hyatt, Marriott, and so on? And your difficulty, in naming this, I think, represents a reality that even though Japan has been very successful in the manufacturing sector, much less successful in the service sector and in parts of the economy which are more domestic-oriented. And I would argue that on the export-led manufacturing sector, the combination of government and business, the cartelization, was disciplined by foreign competition, and therefore it could be efficient because they were competing on the globe, and they produced extremely good products over time. But as far as the domestic service sector went, that combination of government and industry proved lethal for Japan because it was not disciplined by domestic competition, and it proved more and more inefficient over time. So Japan has a very muscular export sector, a very weak, inefficient domestic sector, with some places of efficiency, but by and large inefficient. Let me give an example of how this inefficiency sort of demonstrates itself. Japanese haircuts are very costly. Why are haircuts very costly? Because there's a barber cartel, which prevents barbers from reducing the price. Now, when there's a cartel, often there are entrants who try and challenge the cartel. And there's no surprise in Japan, there was an entrant which tried to give cheap haircuts and attempted to challenge the existing barber cartel. Problem is, the barber cartel decided to fight back. Now, Japan is a democracy. The barber cartel couldn't just say, this guy's charging too low prices, because people like low prices for haircuts. They want to pay a low price. So the barber cartel said instead, in a fit of genius, it thought of a wonderful new regulation and said, having haircuts without having a shampoo first is unhygienic. So all haircuts should first be preceded by a shampoo. This is a brilliant regulation, because immediately it means that the entrant has to invest in costly shampooing facilities, plumbing facilities, and they have to retrofit all their cheap shops with this. It does two things. It increases their costs, and it puts them out of action for a fair amount of time while they do it. And in the meantime, the barber cartel flourishes, right? And again, regulation favors the incumbent, keeps out the entrant. Japan is no surprise. But I would argue there's a more general problem, that the cartelization of many areas of Japan keeps Japanese demand from expanding and therefore makes Japan overly dependent on foreign demand. It is a problem that certainly could emerge in China. China could become overly dependent on foreign demand. It is a problem of many exporters. So in a sense, they found the United States very attractive because the United States was willing to import and to buy and to consume, to become the world's consumer of first and last resort. The problem, of course, is many of those consuming countries now are in deep trouble and have to change their ways, which then implies the producing countries have also to change their ways. And I will come to that in just a second.